Just doing an audio check for ENGG1003 lecture. You should be able to hear me now. Someone give me a thumbs up in Discord. Excellent. Thank you very much. Wonderful. We will start at 9:05. That's the conventional time for a university lecture to start. So we'll start in about 3 or 4 minutes. And just doing a video test too. You should be able to see me on the screen. Wonderful. That's great. All good. I'll switch off and I'll see you in 3 minutes. Good morning, everyone. We are live. And I'm going to open by welcoming you to the very first lecture of ENGG1003. I'm the course coordinator, Steve Weller, and I'll shortly introduce the staff that I'll be presenting the course with. But I wanted to take this moment to welcome you to the university. For many of you, it'll be your introduction to university study. So who would have thought that you'd be on YouTube and Discord for your very first lecture? But that's the world we live in. So as I said, my name's Steve Weller here. I'm a professor in the School of Electrical Engineering and Computing. I'm very happy for you to call me Steve. The other staff with whom I'll be presenting this course are Sarah Johnson, Professor Sarah Johnson. She's also a colleague down the corridor in electrical engineering and computing, and Brenton Schultz, who's worked here for a number of years and is very experienced at delivering this course. So at the moment, you see my face. With me in the room here, I've got Brenton, who's managing the Discord chat, and Sarah's down the corridor also. But it'll be me that you see for the next hour and a half or so. In terms of consultation hours and such, you'll see a course outline that's in the Blackboard Learning Management System. I won't bring it up, but I would encourage you to look at it. In particular, I'd urge you to look at the course outline, the timetable for that for the course. That sets out a pretty accurate schedule of where we'll be going with the lecture content. But in particular, it's got dates for assessment items, and I'll talk a little bit about assessment items. There are about 20 lab demonstrators that we have helping to deliver this course. We have a total of in excess of 760 students in the course. And so this is for the first time ever. We've got a common programming course that runs right across the Faculty of Engineering. So if you're an engineer, possible exception of software engineering, then you're in this course. So we have a very diverse group. Some of you will have programmed already for a couple of years. Some of you will never have written a line of code. This course is aimed at students who have never written a line of code, and we're going to have a lot of fun learning how to write code to solve problems that engineers need to solve. So there is a Blackboard page. A number of you, over half of the class, were on the Discord server over the weekend. That will be our primary sort of moment-to-moment mode of communication, but Blackboard remains the point of contact where we post things like lecture slides, where you'll submit assessment items and such. That's sort of it remains the go-to, and that's where you'll be able to see your assessment item marks, grades and such, but Discord will be the primary mode of communicating. As I said, we've got 760 students, so it's important that we manage those communications as best we can, and Discord is the way to go. So here's Discord. By the time I turned the light off last night, we had almost 450 students that have got onto Discord, and I only opened the server late on Friday afternoon. So out of a class of 760, we're doing pretty well, and that gives me a lot of confidence that we'll be well placed to keep in contact with you and you with us using Discord. And staff will definitely be participating. We're not on call 24/7. In many cases, it'll be one of your peers that'll say you can ask a question, and it may be one of your peers that responds, and that's wonderful. We're using Discord to build a community in this course, and very pleased with how that's going so far. There are a number of channels on Discord, and it'll take us a while to get all the wrinkles out of those, but hopefully the name of the channel will be suggestive of the content that you should post there. Might be cases where I ask you to move to another channel if that's more appropriate. Did a little bit of that over the weekend, but not anticipating doing a whole lot of that. I think you'll work it out quite quickly. If you've never used Discord before, I think you'll find it's a pretty intuitive system. I know many of you will, so that's the way we're going to stay in touch. Okay, in terms of classes, we have 2 lecture sessions per week. This one that's running now, and that's 9 till 11 Monday, 9 o'clock start, and also a second lecture at Thursday at 4 p.m. As a general rule, there's a theme to each week, and the fact that we're split into a 2+1 hour is sort of that's the way it is. That's the way the timetable's been organised. But you sort of should think of those two lectures as being sort of continuations of one upon the other. So the Thursday lecture being a continuation of the Monday for the theme of the week. In addition to the lectures, we have two computer labs, and unlike many of your courses, the computer labs will actually start this week. One of those is on campus, so we're calling that a face-to-face computer lab. That's where you'll sit at a PC in a lab room, a computer room here with somewhere between 20 and 40 other students, and you'll be get given tasks to do, and those tasks will be communicated to you, by a lab sheet that's available in Blackboard. There's, depending on the class size, there'll be at least one demonstrator in the room. They're paid there to answer your questions. If the class size is large, if it's over about 25, we'll have two demonstrators in the room to make sure that you can ask questions and be answered one-on-one by a human in a face-to-face setting. There's also a second computer lab, I say second, but that's held via Zoom. So everyone gets an opportunity to join a lab by Zoom. And again, pre-COVID, all that time ago, pre-COVID, the labs used to be 1 3-hour block. We've split it this year. One of those labs is 2 hours, one of them's 1 hour, one of them's face-to-face, one of them's Zoom. But again, there's one lab sheet per week, and the Zoom lab is part of a consolidated 3-hour lab session for the week. That said, for some of you, the Zoom session will occur before the face-to-face lab. That's fine. As I said, we've got one lab sheet. It runs across the two sessions. You might make a start on Zoom, and you're able to speak with a human face-to-face in the on-campus lab. It might be the other way around. You get started in the face-to-face lab, you go home, you think about it, you log on to Zoom in the second session and have your questions answered there if you didn't have them answered earlier. Let me just go ahead. Yeah, okay, so So in terms of a textbook, we will be using the book that you see there on the screen by Ling and Lung Tangen. Let's call it LL, Program for Computations, Python. So it's an introduction to the Python programming language. That is the language that we will be using exclusively in this course. But it's really about, it's very much in the spirit of this course. It's not to teach you to be an expert programmer in all elements of the computer programming language Python, but rather to use Python as an engineer to solve problems of engineering relevance. And the part about, there's many things to like about this textbook, but one thing I particularly like is it's open access. It's available for free as an ebook via the University Library. You can see a link there on the screen, and I'd highly recommend that you either bookmark that or download a PDF. We won't stick to it in all cases, but it's certainly a framework that we're using for the for most of the course. Highly recommended. Some of the lab questions you'll see come directly from the text. We're 15 minutes into the course. I don't want to scare you, but at some point you might think, oh, this course is not for me, not sure, should I be here? What am I doing here? I'm a bit anxious about this course. You might think about at some point of dropping out. There are a couple of key dates that you need to keep in mind. Up until what's called the HEC census date, which is Friday, the 19th of March, that's the Friday of week 4. We're in week 1 now. You're able to withdraw up until and including that date without any financial or academic penalty. If you withdraw prior to 19th of March, then this course never appears on your academic transcript and you don't pay a cent. So you've got 4 weeks to work out whether this course is for you. In saying that, I think you'll have a very strong idea about what this course is about, and you'll have the first assessment item, I believe, assessed before that date, so you'll get a sense of what assessment is like in this course. If you withdraw after the 19th of March and prior to the 4th of June, up until including the 4th of June, you don't incur an academic penalty. So the course doesn't appear on your academic transcript. It's like it was never there, but you still pay for the course. So in terms of dollars, Friday the 19th of March is a key date to keep in mind. If you withdraw from the 5th of June, just after, a minute after midnight from the 5th of June or after, you not only pay for the course, it's a fail unless you've completed the requirements for the course. So there's a sequence of dates there. Don't want to scare you, but I do want to be up front with you. You've got a month to see what the course is like. Where to find help? I'm going to go through these in an order that's not quite presented on the screen here. But where do you go to help? Some combination of the textbook, do a bit of reading yourself, look at your lecture notes, your lab demonstrator during the enrolled lab times. They are paid to help you solve your debugging problems, help you learn how to learn, searching for solutions, reading documentation. That's what their job is. They're good at it and they enjoy it, and that's a golden opportunity for you to ask a question in a way that's not possible for when we're speaking in this mode, a lecture with a chat. Again, I've mentioned Discord. It'll be we're looking forward to being able to provide assistance, or peers, your student peers might be around to provide assistance to you on Discord about technical content in the course. You can always use Google, of course. The Python programming language, about which I'll say more later this morning, but the Python programming language is very well supported. There is a vibrant community online, and there is a ton of online material for you to find information on the course, on Python, on the programming language. What's not listed there is an email to me. There will be cases where something to do with your enrollment means that you need to contact me directly, and you should always feel free to do that. It'll take a while for us to get the settings right, but I don't want you to be hesitant to email me if you think there's something about your enrollment that requires my specific attention. Give you one example. It's happened already, and I know it'll happen again. We have a number of students who, because of COVID travel restrictions, find themselves in countries other than Australia and yet are enrolled in the course. If that's the case, a number of you have already emailed me, and any others in that situation should also email me, because we'll need to make some arrangements so that you can fully participate in the course. But if it's a general question about, hey, I didn't understand what Steve said on slide 10 of lecture 2, email to me is not the appropriate place, and I just won't reply to that email. I just can't do it. I just don't have the bandwidth. But put it on Discord. Chances are you'll get an answer within minutes from me, from a demonstrator, from Sarah, from Brenton, from one of your peers. Assessment structure. There's a mid-semester quiz. There are 3 assessed laboratories in which you get the opportunity. You in weeks 4, 9, and 11. The face-to-face lab in that week will be devoted to you sitting at a computer, solving a problem, and then demonstrating your solution to that problem to the demonstrator in that session. So we'll give you plenty of heads up about what form that assessment will take, but you'll get that's the way it will be assessed. You'll be assessed on the spot for a programming activity that you've undertaken in the room in weeks 4, 9, and 11. There's a mid-semester quiz, as I mentioned, that will take place in the Thursday lecture of week 6, just before the Easter break. And there are 2 programming assignments that are due in weeks 7 and 13. And there, you'll be given a programming assignment 2 or 3 weeks in advance. You'll get a chance to work on it in your own time over an extended period, 2 or 3 weeks, and then demonstrate it in the week 7 and or 13 face-to-face lab. In addition, there's a final exam worth 35% of your overall course mark, and that takes place in the final examination period, which will begin in early June. There's a passing grade of 50%. So you need to add up all your assessments there, and you'll be able to track them in Blackboard to know exactly where you stand at any point in time. 50% or more, you pass the course. In addition, there's a requirement that you score 40% or higher in the final exam in order to be eligible for a pass. So that's just to lay out the general lie of the land. I've got no doubt as we progress through the semester that there'll be more details. There may be questions you have. We'll answer them as we go, but that's the overall assessment structure. Things like, what do I do if I'm ill in a week that there's an assessment due? All that sort of stuff we'll either do one-on-one or via Discord or with your lab demonstrator. But that's on what you see on the screen there is the overall assessment structure for the course. So what it means is there's a balance between progressive activity that you do through the semester and also a final exam worth about a third of your overall mark that gets done in the examination period. Attendance. The university has a policy that for first year courses, or what we call 1000 level courses, such as ENGG1003, that students attend at least 80% of the on-campus labs. So for this course, that means that your weekly 2-hour computer lab for this course, there's a mandatory attendance requirement. And I think 80% of 13 labs is about 9 labs. So you should be planning to attend 9 labs. Lots of questions and follow up. I'm sure that's not my decision. That's a university-wide policy, and that's the one that we're obliged to enforce. I've already mentioned international students. I'll be working with you to ensure you're able to meet that attendance requirement, even though you're not here in country. The mandatory attendance does not apply to the weekly 1-hour Zoom lab, so you can attend or not as you wish. If you're unwell, don't attend a lab. We don't want you being on campus if you're unwell. You can attend a later lab session, doesn't require a medical certificate. You can advise a demonstrator in another session and all will be good. I've said that's a university policy and we're obliged to implement it. I would say rather than getting bound up in rules, we're obliged to follow them. Computer programming's not a spectator sport. You could think of learning to program a computer as doing something like learning to swim or learning to play a musical instrument. There's only so much you're going to get out of watching YouTube. It's a hands-on activity. So yeah, there's an 80% mandatory attendance requirement. Okay, we'll live with that. I strongly encourage you to stay up in contact with the course, do the activities. I'll have details. We'll be doing a little bit later today of what it means to get your hands dirty, writing some computer code, even if you've never written a single line before. Computer programming is a lot of fun. It's also an activity that you get better at through experience. And that's what I'd encourage, as much as focusing on at least 80% attendance on the on-campus labs. It's an activity that you don't want to sort of do once a week and then think that'll sink in for the next week. If you're learning a musical instrument, chances are you're playing every day or most days of the week. If you're learning to program a computer, chances are you should be programming a little bit every day rather than wedging it all, late on one day in the week. Now that's easier said than done. I know that, but that's the way that most students get the most achievement, self-satisfaction, and achieve the learning outcomes is through that hands-on regular activity. So programming is quite unforgiving. That sounds a bit scary, but computers are really good at doing what they're told, and they're not very nuanced about saying, "Oh, I know what he meant when he typed that in. I'll fix that for him." What that means is that if you're developing code on a machine that you own, the integrated development environment, the IDE, and I'll spell out what that means later, you're more than welcome to install it for free on your home computer. There might be a chance you develop code at home and find out it doesn't work on a university computer. and the assessment demonstration can be on your privately owned laptop, that's fine. We don't necessarily encourage it, but if you want to turn up on your laptop, that's great. Backup, making sure your laptop's got a battery that will, all that stuff, that's up to you. So again, while programming is very unforgiving, it also gives you very immediate feedback. If you write a little computer program and it doesn't work, no one's judging you. The computer's just saying, "Doesn't work, didn't do what you thought it did. Go back and fix it." And so you get instant feedback about, and you might have to, scratch your head, sleep on it, come back and work on the problem the next day. I've mentioned before that all the assessments, with the exception of the final exam, are graded during your lab session. We can shift people between lab sessions, but that requires approval, details to follow. Okay, the name of the course is Procedural Programming, and I don't really want to get too much in the details of why it's called procedural programming. There are other modes of thinking about computer programs. You can think of this course as being an introduction to computer programming for engineers. And we're not going to get too hung up on language features. There are many of you will be studying programs that you get to learn all sorts of detail about computer programming languages over the next 4 years. This course may well be the only course in computer programming that some of you will do, and it's imperative that you learn the basics well. And for that purpose, we've chosen the computer language Python. That's a break from what we've done in previous years. Up until in previous years, we've used a programming environment called MATLAB in conjunction with a computer programming language called C. And the hybrid of those two attempted to meet the needs of most students most of the time, but it also failed to meet the needs of many students much of the time. The language Python is a very popular programming language. So the skills you will learn in this course are not just good for educational purposes. They could possibly set you up for a paid employment. You will learn skills in this course that are in a computer programming language that's in high demand. It's also a wonderful platform to learn the basics of computer programming. If you go on to learn other languages, Python's not going to suit every need for every student. But it's an ideal place from which to start. So you may be asking about, why do I need programming? You've come here, it's day one of your program, and you might be a surveying student, you might be a civil engineering student, you might be computer systems engineering, in which the need for programming is obvious. You might be a mechanical engineering student. You think, what am I learning computer programming for? The fact is that engineers use and need to know how to use computers to solve all sorts of problems. The days of closed form solutions where you look up an answer in a table in a textbook, they're long gone. Computers are an integral part of the way that engineers solve problems. Not all computers are the same. Some types of students, such as electrical, mechatronics, and computer systems engineering students, will need to know programming that operates in small, so-called embedded environments. There's a computer in your microwave oven, for example. Those courses, electromechanical and computer systems engineering students, you will be enrolled, as much of the class is in ENGG1003, and you'll be using a variant of Python known as MicroPython to solve those embedded problems. So there are other computers environments around. I mentioned MATLAB. You'll be learning to use MATLAB in subsequent courses. A really good grounding in Python gives you a wonderful platform to make the transition to MATLAB or C as you need it. And underpinning it all is the so-called numerical methods, using computers to solve numerical problems, whether you're designing a bridge, digging a tunnel, designing a control system for a chemical reactor, or designing a robot that tracks a line or balances a so-called inverted pendulum. They all require computations, and computations means getting your hands dirty, writing some computer programming code, and that's what this course is about. I've mostly talked about that. So, really basic question about what is a computer? Computers take many forms. I'm speaking to you now from a desktop computer, but this morning I've also used my mobile phone and my iPad. They're all types of computers, but a computer's an electronic device designed to perform calculations really quickly. Computers are really good at basically doing one thing, and that's computing. They add numbers, they subtract numbers, they multiply numbers, they divide numbers. Everything they need to do is numbers. It sounds restrictive, but as we'll see, and I'm sure you you probably don't need to hear it from me. The ability to do those computations quickly means you can do everything from controlling the ailerons on an automated plane, through to a robot that welds a car body, to predicting the weather. They all come down to computations. So a really simplistic view of every computer, no matter how small or fast it is, they take input from a variety of sources, they do some processing, and they generate output. Sounds straightforward, sounds maybe even a little boring, but it's an incredibly rich model. Input, computers only understand electrical signals. So if we've got a real life environment, we need sensors to take that external environment and convert it into two states. Computers are overwhelmingly binary in nature. They only represent information as zeros and ones, binary states. You might think, well, I can provide input to a touchpad on my mobile phone or a keyboard. Yep, it's a device which converts keystrokes and screen presses into a series of on-off voltages. What about a mouse? What about a touchpad? Yeah, they're devices which convert movement into a series of on-off voltages. So for our computing model, anything that generates input, we're going to call an input device. For the most part in this course, that input device will take the form of either a keyboard, but it will also take the form of files, and the data might come from a vision sensor, and it's provided to you in the form of a file. The underlying data is analog or from the real world. In the end, it's a sequence of zeros and ones that are provided to the computer in order for us to do the processing. Input, processing, output. So computers are really good at processing stuff, and processing means doing computations, and that means a series of manipulations that are performed on that input. And when you boil it right down, computers are really good at doing really, really simple operations like adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, moving one piece of information from one place in a computer memory to another place. If you're lucky, they might even be able to do mathematical operations like square root operations. But they do those really simple operations super quick. The writing of those instructions is called programming. And an output device takes all those numbers that we've taken in from sensors, done some computations with them, and then translate them into a form that's useful in the outside world. Could be a printer, could be a color screen, could be a monitor. It could be a cruise control on an automated vehicle. It could be a really simple display in a medical device. It could be an output device which is controlling the angle of a rudder in a computer controlled flight system. So input, processing, output. For the most part, this course focuses on the processing. So here we are. We take binary data, we do some processing, we generate some outputs. It's a simplistic model, but it's possibly it hides a lot of complexity, a lot of richness, and a lot of interest. And we're going to get our hands on a lot of that interest. First exposure to computing on the processing block that you see there. So in a little more detail, I won't go into it in a huge amount of detail. For those of you, for example, in electrical engineering students, or maybe you're doing computer systems engineering, inside the processor block, this is the central processing unit, the CPU of a microprocessor. Internally, it's also got blocks. There's a processor that does the arithmetic operations. There's memory that's either used for holding computer program code, or memory that's used by the computer program itself. For the purposes of this course, we won't go into the details of those internal processing blocks. If you're doing electrical, computer systems engineering, to some extent mechatronics, you'll need to know about those courses, that information in subsequent courses. The processor, as I said, performs those mathematical and data manipulation tasks. They're not, the details of which are not relevant for this course, but they are relevant to ELEC 1710. And we're very fortunate in this course that Sarah Johnson and myself, together with Brenton, are sharing the teaching of this course. Sarah is the course coordinator for ELEC 1710. So in second semester, many of you will be fortunate to have Sarah taking you through the ELEC 1710 course, where for those of you that do need to know about what's going on inside this processing block, Sarah's the course coordinator for that course. So I've said everything's a number. Computers can only process numbers. That's all they do. It's something they do very well. But some things that aren't numbers need to be represented in computers. The simplest examples of which are so-called ASCII codes. I won't spell out what ASCII means, but it's a computer code. Every letter of the alphabet, every digit on your keyboard has a representation as a number. Likewise, characters that are from the languages other than English also have representations as codes, so they can be represented in digital computers. What about images? You might say, what about video? What about still images? Well, each pixel, each little pixel in that image is allocated an intensity value in a red, green, blue format. That's also means we're representing pictures as numbers, maybe sequences of numbers. So to represent color and other image artifacts can be represented as numbers, and they must be represented as numbers. Everything we see from a digital computer is represented as a number or a sequence of numbers, a group of numbers. Sound, same deal. The waveforms sampled at regular intervals and stored as a series of numbers. And if you sample fast enough, with enough resolution, with small enough resolution, you can get a very high fidelity representation of sound, which you end up with a digital file representation of sound. And there's multiple standards that exist for all those that are above. The basic principle is, if it's text, if it's image, if it's sound, it has a digital representation, and therefore we can process using computer programming languages. Memory acts like, is a bit like humans. Computers need to store intermediate results, and memory acts like a set of written notes for the computer. And there's two types of, we think of computer program, two things can be stored in the computer memory. We can actually store the underlying code, the instructions for the calculations, or we can actually store the data itself. Software, and this is the main focus of this course. The processing that we're going to be doing on the numbers, to take numbers and produce numbers, the processing that we're going to do is a computer programming language, and it's known as Python. That doesn't mean that your computer automatically understands the Python programming language. Computers need to understand a very specific code, a very specific sequence of codes that's very specific to each processor. So an Intel microprocessor has a very different internal structure, architecture to a Mac, to an iOS device. Those very specific instructions are written in a so-called low-level code. Python is a so-called high-level program, which allows us to interact with it as humans without needing to understand the details of the low-level programming. So it's helpful, even at this introductory stage, to think about software being divided into three groups. At the very lowest level, although at the top of this list, is so-called machine code. That is a digital 0-1 representation of instructions that are provided to a microprocessor CPU, central processing unit, in order to do calculations. And right down at the machine code level, there are instructions that basically instruct the microprocessor to add two numbers and store the result in a particular location. Or more realistically, add two numbers, take the result as a separate instruction and add it and put it in a memory location. So that's machine code. No one programs in machine code. One level above that, one level down in the list, is assembly language. And that's a human readable form, but again, at that very low level instruction, add these two numbers. Subtract one number from another number. Take the result, write it into memory. It's human readable, although it's incredibly inefficient for humans to write. It's possible to write a computer program in a so-called high-level language like Python, have it translated, compiled, interpreted, have it translated into a sequence of assembly language instructions. It's possible to write one level of high-level code that translates into hundreds of assembly language instructions. So computers are almost always programmed by humans in what are called high-level languages: human readable, human interpretable, human writable languages, and Python is one of those. I don't want to go into the details here, but the machine code instructions are very specific to computers, and need to be interpreted by those different computers. So for a high-level language, one of the advantages is that you can write a high-level language, for example, in Python, and have it run on an iPhone, have it run on a desktop computer, have it run on an iPad, have it run on a Mac, have it run on a supercomputer. You write one program and the software development environment translates it into the machine code that's needed to run on those specific platforms. So that's one very big advantage of a high-level language. You write it in a human readable form and it's translated as needed into the machine code for each individual platform. Again, assembly language is one step higher. You can see right in the middle of this slide, I've got an instruction in assembly language and machine code. I'd have to think about what add AX10 means. I think what it means is take the value in a particular storage location right in the middle of the CPU called a register. Take the contents of that register, here it's called AX, add the number 10 to it, and then write the result back into the register AX. I don't need to know it. I don't use it. I don't expect you to know it, but it is at least human readable. The machine code instruction is literally a string of zeros and ones. I don't even know if that machine code corresponds to that assembly language instruction. It probably does. Again, it doesn't matter because behind the scenes, there's a process which converts high-level language like Python into assembly language into machine code. Higher-level languages. They come in many different flavors. I've mentioned already Python, and I'll continue to mention Python as we work through the course. But there are other languages, and all of them have their advantages and disadvantages. The first two listed in that list are C and MATLAB, quite different computer programming language to each other, and serve very different purposes. MATLAB's an easy language to write your first program in. It's also quite a very slow language to write programs in that require a lot of computation. C is a very popular programming language and has been for the past 40, pushing 50 years. It's very powerful, but it's not necessarily the easiest language to write your first computer program in. I like to think of the C programming language if they were cars. MATLAB is sort of like a clunky old Commodore station wagon. It'll get you where you need to go. Probably it'll be a bit slow, easy to drive, reliable. It'll probably do the job, get you shopping, all good. C is a bit like driving a Formula One car. It's incredibly efficient because the C language is actually easily translated into those assembly language instructions, the lower level instructions. It's really efficient, but it's like a Formula One car. If you put your foot on the accelerator at the wrong time, you're probably going to kill someone. You'll fill memory with the wrong values and you'll crash your computer and need to reload the operating system. It's very efficient, but it's a very unforgiving programming language. So it's not ideal for the purpose that we find ourselves in this course. And there are other languages there: Java, Python, C++, Fortran. In one of the earlier slides, there was a list to a ranking of popularity of computer programming languages. There are, I don't know, I'll say 100. There's probably more. Getting the right language for every purpose is not possible. There's a range of languages because of the range of needs. But what they all have in common, these languages, is that they're computer readable. They're human readable, but they're also interpretable by computers. So they're sort of in the sweet spot. You know when you see computer code because it looks like computer code. If I back up a few, there's a screenshot here on the right that you can see. You can read it. Interpreting what it does might require some expertise. Recognizing computers, we've talked about them a little bit today. Here's some images. I'm delivering this lecture on a desktop computer. Brenton's sitting in my office here beside me with a laptop computer. I've got my smartphone here. Different computers for different purposes. You could probably also argue that if you've got like a credit card in your wallet, there's probably a simple CPU embedded in that. They all have this characteristic: input devices, output devices, and processors, but they differ radically depending on the application. So these computers, I know you've seen them all those before. Some of these you may have seen, some of these you may not have seen, some of these you may have seen and not thought of them as computers, and yet of course they are. So if you've been programming on computers at school, you might have used what's called a little Raspberry Pi board. The input-output devices differ from a desktop computer. You've got to provide them yourself, and they're pretty simplistic, but they're actually quite powerful processors. Game stations like Sony PS4 that you see here, they also are computers. Their input and output devices are very specific, in particular the input devices. But the processing, again, they've got memory, they've got processors, and they're actually quite powerful in the speed of operations that they can compute. With things like Apple TV or your remote controls, they're also computers, but maybe not have thought of those as computers. Again, input devices, output devices, and a processor. Let's keep going. Things like smart TVs. They're smart because they're actually a computer. They've got an input device, which is your remote control. They've got an output device, which is their reason for being. It's a screen. But they've also got processors built into them. They've also got memory built into it. So they're able to do operations themselves. That's what makes them smart computers. If you were to go down to an electricity substation and open up the cabinets in there, you'd find them full of what are called programmable logic controllers, which are really specific types of computers that take measurements from the electricity grid. Is a switch open or closed? Is this transformer? What's the voltage of the transformer? What's the power flow along the transformer? They're measured, they're processed, and they're sent to the control room in order for the controller to maintain the supply and stability of the power system. For medical engineering students, things like defibrillators and medical devices, they are also computers. It's a very powerful model. You can see the vast differences between the different types of computers here. You got a router at home, it's a computer. Arduino boards that you might see in ENGG1003, also computers. They differ radically in the amount of memory they've got. They differ quite a lot in how fast they operate. They differ radically in the type of processors that do the processing, and yet all of them are computers. All of them do processing, and I hesitate to say you could program them all in Python, but if there was one language where you could, I reckon it's probably close to Python. So they're all computers. They've all got this fundamental input processing output pattern going on. What does that mean for you as a programmer? It means that you're, depending on what platform, what computer type you're writing for, your program might have limitation. Your platform might have limitations that affect you as a programmer. No use writing a computer program with the assumption that there's a full big color screen available to display information if in fact it's a defibrillator with a very constrained output display, or a programmable logic controller which doesn't even have a screen. And different computers have different programming requirements. Okay. We're going to focus a bit more now on, let's see where I'm up to. On Python as a computer programming language. Python is what's known as an interpreted language. That means when we type computer code from a text file or a command prompt, and I'm going to show you how that works shortly, the Python environment, the Python language, supports the ability to take that code and convert it into machine instructions completely hidden from you as a human, and do it on the fly, line by line, as you type the code in. And then the programming environment is responsible for handing that code in machine instruction form over to your computer operating system, where it's executed, or the instructions are followed. In this course, a computer will be a laptop or a PC, or it might even be an iPad. You can run Python on an iPad or an iPhone. Outside this course, it could be a microcontroller, which is a tiny little computer board that looks like one of these, that's got input, output. For those of you that are doing ENGG1003, most of you are. Some of you will be using Python, and you'll be writing Python for a little board like this one here, this Arduino board. I think it's close to that. A little bit different, but similar. And you might think, well, that makes sense. You type a computer programming language in, and the software development environment converts it in machine instructions and it's executed. That sort of makes sense. Isn't that the way that all computer programs work? Yes and no. They all do the conversion between the higher level and the machine language instructions, although not all languages are interpreted. So interpreted languages, the key here is that they do this operation, this translation to instructions is done on the fly. Not all languages do that. The C programming language, for example, doesn't do it. If you write a computer program in the C programming language, you need to write your program in an editor, a text editor. process that language, that computer program, using a piece of software known as a compiler. The compiler then creates a batch of machine language instructions that are then executed by the computer. So that means for when you're testing code, you write code, you run it through the compiler, you run your program. That's because C is not an interpreted language, it's a compiled language, whereas Python's interpreted. And that's going to have real advantages for us when we're introducing programming to students who have never seen it before. It means we can sit at a so-called command line. We can sit with a prompt and type in one instruction and have that instruction executed. And you might think, well, there are disadvantages to interpreted languages. Why wouldn't all languages be interpreted? There are speed limit constraints that usually limitations that usually come from interpreted languages. There's usually an overhead of doing the conversion on the fly. Python's pretty unusual in that, for the most case, code written in Python is actually quite efficient, time efficient. MATLAB, I mentioned before, as a high-level programming language. It's also an it's an interpreter. I think of it as an interpreted language, but it's slow. So Python's got the ability to both be interpreted and fast. That's one of its advantages. So we've chosen Python. It's integrated into the textbook that we've chosen. And we are recommending that the software environment that students use in this course for writing Python programs is known as PyCharm. This one here, I haven't got a little cursor, but PyCharm. PyCharm is what's called an integrated development environment, an IDE. So in that environment, and I'll demonstrate it for you shortly, it's possible for you to write a little Python program and have it execute and have the display taken from the keyboard, from the input taken from the keyboard, display shown on a screen. It's also possible to work at this command prompt, sit there and type in Python line by line. There are 3 different flavors of the PyCharm software. We're recommending that students in this course use the so-called Community Edition, and there's a link here provided at the bottom of the page that you see on the screen at the moment. The Community Edition is the sort of the entry-level edition to the PyCharm IDE, and it'll do everything we need to do for this course. It'll allow you to write big programs. It'll allow you to write programs without any obvious constraints. Everything you need for this course you'll be able to use, and the Community Edition is free. And on Blackboard, under the Week 1 course materials, there's a short 7 or 8 minute video that steps you through the installation of PyCharm on a Windows computer. And I'm very grateful to Brenton, sitting here with me now. Brenton put that short video together. So that short video has been tailored for this course. So Brenton steps you through from scratch the installation of that PyCharm IDE. So if you've never used a computer in this mode before, if you've never written a computer programming language again before, these instructions are written for you. The installation process is something that's only done once. You do it once, you get it right, and you move on to write programs in Python. Not something you have to do every week. You do it once. I believe it's also been tested. Sarah can confirm that there's pretty much the same instructions or very similar instructions followed on a Mac also work. I should say that if you don't have a computer, or PyCharm is installed on all the computer labs that ENGG1003 is programmed into for this semester. So if you don't have a computer, you can turn up and use PyCharm on one of the university computers. So just in terms of fundamental concepts, we've talked at some length in today's lecture about this idea of input, output, and processing. Python is able to take input from a keyboard and send output to the screen. And we call that, technically we call that the console, and I'll demonstrate the console for you in just a second. It's also possible when you're writing larger programs where you don't want to be entering, small numbers of characters from the keyboard, but you want to be taking in large files. They might be stored on a hard disk or a flash drive or some other device, or indeed the output written to those devices. We'll show you how to do that with Python in later weeks. Don't really want to talk in detail about that. Other IO methods beyond this course, if you need to know about them, you will. You'll either see them in the second half of this year with Sarah in ELEC 1710. Some of you may see them in ELEC 1500 in this semester. And others of you will see them in subsequent years in ELEC or MECA courses. I'll leave that for the moment. Okay, basic Python program. In fact, I've talked now about Python being an interpreted language. So a Python program can be just one line. That's different from C. So let me see if I can show you what you should be able to see now on the screen. The screen should have gone dark, and you should be seeing the PyCharm IDE. So what we're doing is sitting here at the console, and just bear with me for a moment. I'm going to type in our first Python code. The print statement will write to the screen. And Python's is really helpful. The IDE, the integrated development, PyCharm is really helpful because it does some auto completion. So you'll notice then as I typed the print statement, as I did the left parentheses, it put a matching right parentheses in for me. As I typed the first quote statement, quote symbol, it put the matching one in. So now if I type, there's our first, is it a program? Don't know, but it's our first Python statement. And the beauty of the console is we're able to do that without going through an interpreter, explicit interpreter, without going through a compiler. So I can, because we're now at a console, you can think of it as like a command line prompt. I can use the up arrow to take me back to that message. I provide the Python statement and it prints the string to the screen. What happens if we type 1 + 1? We get 2. Awesome. That's good. What about 2 × 3? 6. Excellent. We're doing some calculations. What happens if we type 1 + 1? Excellent. So we've got the ability to do a little bit of arithmetic here now. So this is what you're seeing on the screen here now is the PyCharm IDE, and we're at the Python console. We haven't actually typed a program yet. We'll do that I'll show you a couple of short programs in a minute, but I just wanted to show you what the console looks like. What I would say is that in this week's lab session, you'll get the opportunity to install PyCharm. If it's not, it should already be on the machine, but you'll get a chance to do what I'm doing now. You'll be able to get your hands on and do in your lab sessions. So Yeah, that's all I'll say there. And you'll also be able to write your first small programs. We'll see what a small program looks like in a moment. Okay. So basic Python program, Python being interpreted, we can do things in just one line. So I've given you my first live demonstration, and it's my intention to integrate those live code illustrations as we work through the course. Many of you, well, let me back up. The fact that we're delivering lectures online actually gives us some opportunities that if you were all sitting in a large lecture theatre, 750 of you sitting in front of me, you wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to do. One of those things is to be running PyCharm and writing computer programs as the lectures are being delivered. So if you're fortunate enough to have two computer screens at your disposal, you could be looking at one which is streaming the lecture, and you could be running the PyCharm IDE in the other. And I can't stress this enough, being interpreted, we're able to do things at a prompt. We can test code line by line. One phrase you'll hear us use quite a lot in the course is syntax. I said computer programming can be quite demanding. That's not meant to be scary. It's meant to be, it's meant to convey the idea that computers are very literal. They're not very good at interpreting what you mean when you say something. They want it written in a computer programming languages expect to have those instructions conveyed in a high level language that follow very strict rules. Don't worry about it being strict. We'll work about we'll as we work through the course, you'll get to see what that strictness looks like, and you build up in baby steps towards complex programs. But syntax is for human languages are the rules around the order of words in a sentence. And so if I write the sentence, "Are you going to the movies on Tuesday?" That's a well-formed English sentence in the English language. It happens to be a question, but it's a well-formed sentence. So that sentence, the meaning of it is clear from the order of the words in the sentence. What about the second one? Are you on Tuesday to the movies going? Makes you sound like Yoda. Arguably, it's not following proper English syntax, although the meaning is clear. If you said, "Are you on Tuesday to the movies going?" most English speakers would understand what was intended. The meaning of the words are what are called semantics. And those of you that are studying computer programming languages at higher levels will probably do whole courses on semantics of computer programming languages. I want to focus on syntax, which is the order of the words in a sentence. Because in computer programming languages like Python, the syntax defines what is legal, what's valid to be interpreted as an instruction to the computer. So while those two sentences have a similar meaning in English, the equivalent in a computer programming language will either fail to operate, or even worse, the computer will interpret the instruction given to it and do something other than what you intended. So in computer programming languages like Python, the structure of the text given to the compiler or the interpreter differs greatly. So we've got print hello is different from print hello or print hello. Let's have a look and see what Python does when at the command line when we type these in. We've already seen what print hello does. It does what we want and prints the string hello to the screen. The second option, which I've just slid off the screen, but it's in your notes, is print hello. Oh, those red lines there are the PyCharm IDE's way of saying, don't understand what you meant. The syntax is invalid as a sequence of instructions. And you can see the last statement here, name hello is not defined, because there is an interpretation of the statement print hello, We haven't got to the syntax of that particular statement yet, but it's valid in a certain context, but we haven't provided the context. So the PyCharm IDE is saying, I don't know what you mean by hello. It's just a sequence of letters, and I don't know how to interpret that. If I do something different and just say print hello, again, there's a syntax error that's flagged by the IDE. So the message from that little illustration is that syntax is really important to computer programming languages. The 3 versions of print hello that you see at the bottom of the screen there all have very different interpretations. One of them is correct as we intended, the first one. The second one is correct in context, print hello in parentheses. And the third one is simply invalid syntax. So what that means is quite often when we're dealing with computers, we're going to be getting feedback from the interpreter or the IDE that the syntax is invalid. So I want to take this opportunity to sort of to raise a point that may mark a shift from if you've studied computer programming at high school, or again, this course is on the assumption that you haven't, but maybe you have. You may have developed software at school where the emphasis was on getting the program exactly right, getting it exactly right sort of first time. You might have been asked in an exam to write a small computer program to achieve a certain outcome. As we move to a university level mode, and particularly to think like engineers, that's not going to happen. In fact, I want you to make mistakes in this course. If you aren't making mistakes, you're probably not learning. It's a really helpful mistake to make, to know that print hello in quotation marks is different from print hello in just the parentheses. When you're getting your hands dirty with code, making mistakes is great. Making mistakes all the time is not good because you tend to make slow progress. But making mistakes is great because you learn from your mistakes. If I was teaching you how to learn to play the piano, I can't play the piano, but if I was teaching you how to play the piano and I said to you, I don't want you to make any mistakes where you put your fingers, I want you to get the notes right, I want you to get the timing right. Don't make a mistake. You're learning nothing because you'll be so worried about making a mistake. So here's a lesson that you might not have expected me to say, a message that you might not have expected from your very first lecture at university is, I want you to make mistakes. I don't want you to make mistakes or big mistakes in assessment items. I want you to make mistakes beforehand, because if you make mistakes beforehand in the lab, at home, as you're learning, doing the programming assignments, by the time you get to the assessments, you're much less likely to make those mistakes. It's sort of like piano practice. You make your mistakes, you learn by repetition, by repeated exposure. You're enjoying it, you're having fun, but you're learning. Making mistakes is great. You don't want to make the same mistakes all the time. You don't make mistakes all the time, if you know what I mean. But making simple mistakes, you learn. In saying that, if I go back to the PyCharm IDE, this text in red here and the syntax error at the bottom, they're not very friendly. And there's no way around sugarcoating that message. Interpreters and compilers are often very good at saying, I don't know what you mean, that's invalid syntax. Great. They're often not very good at saying, that's invalid syntax, but I think I know what you mean, can I fix it for you? They don't do that. They basically put their hands up and say, in computer language, I'll do my best to tell you what the problem was, but the error messages are sometimes not the easiest to interpret. Is there any way around that? Sure. 2 ways. One, lots of programming, repeated exposure, and with time you make fewer errors. The other thing, and again, it's a bit of advice that you'll hear and see as we work through the course, is that when you're developing large programs, you do them incrementally. You write a small program, you write a big program in small steps. And each step you do a bit of testing. Add a bit of code, change a bit of code, do some testing. And over time, you're able to write more code, bigger chunks, solve bigger problems with bigger steps. But to start with, it's line by line. That might sound tedious. In fact, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun because you get feedback instantaneously from a computer program and an IDE, which is not going to judge you. It's just going to tell you you're wrong. So here we've talked about the strictness of the Python IDE, and this is not a shortcoming of PyCharm. It's not a shortcoming of the Python language. It's a feature of computer programming languages in general. They're really good at being really dumb and doing very explicit instructions quickly. But those explicit instructions don't leave any room for sort of grey zone interpretation. As a consequence, most programming languages are case sensitive. Let's see if Python's case sensitive. By that, I mean that print with a lowercase is totally different to a print with an uppercase. Let's see if Python's case sensitive. We can do a print hello. There's print hello. What about if I change that to an uppercase P? No good. Uppercase P prints not defined. So the Python is that fussy, and most programming languages are that fussy too. Print uppercase P is not the same as lowercase p. Now, if you and I are writing a note to each other, or an email to each other, a text message to each other on Discord, uppercase, lowercase, don't matter too much. Python, programming languages, it does. So we need to get used to that. We saw print for text output. So in fact, we've done a little bit of processing. We've added a couple of numbers. We've multiplied 2 by 3. And we've done a little bit of output display. We've used print to go to the screen. What we haven't done is take any input. And there's a function. I'll talk a lot more about functions in Python as we work through the course. But there's a function known as input, which takes input from the keyboard. And you can see a bit of code here that we're going to run in Python in the IDE just live in just a moment. And so what that function does, it takes input text and converts it to other data types. And so, for example, the input function could take the text 1, 3, meaning the key press 1 and 3, and converts it to a number 13. And you might think, isn't it obvious if you type 1 and a 3 next to each other that 13 is meant, the number 13? No, not to a computer program. It's got to be, as I said, they do, I don't say dumb operations because that's not right. Often the computer programming is quite sophisticated, but they do very explicit operations, and they need things presented literally. So let's have a look at that. So what I want you to do is look at the code in the middle here, x equals input, type a number, and then followed by print x. So we're going to do that at the IDE, at the command line. X equals input, open brackets, grade. It knows we're input function. It's closed the brackets for us. It's got to type a number. Great. Follow. Great. Type a number. Let's type 1. Excellent. And the next statement is print x. 1. Excellent. We've actually just taken a number from the standard input, from the command, from the Python console keyboard, if you like, and we've displayed it. Our processing was basically just a straight through line between input and output. So the processing step wasn't very interesting, but we just did input, simple processing, nothing at all, and then displayed an output. So let's do that again. We printed type a number, x equals type a number. Come back to the x in a moment. Type a number, let's try 13. Okay, now we're back at the command line. Let's type print X. Notice what I did there was I was at the command line. I didn't have to type print X again. I used the up arrow. There's print X. Excellent. 13. It's done that interpretation. It's taken the two numbers 1 and 3 that I typed at the keyboard. The input function has been clever enough behind the scenes to be able to convert that into a number and then write that number back out to the screen through the print statement. Okay. Let's do something a little bit different. Type a number, 13 again. Let's type not X, but X plus 1. Uh-oh. How do I make it bigger? Yeah. Okay. View. Appearance. How do I? So just bear with me a second. I'm just going to try and make the font a little larger so you can see it. Mouse is up on the screen. There we go. There we go. View. Okay, lovely. Thank you for that. So got a bit of feedback from Discord that the font was a bit small. I apologize for that. I'll have it set up a little bit differently next time. So let's run it again. X equals type a number. Type the number 13. And let's print the number to the screen. Done. But if we try and print X plus 1, so if we're going to add 1 to the 13 and print it out, we get an error. Getting to the bottom of what caused that error is going to take us into next week's lecture content, maybe Thursday, but certainly next week. I just wanted to flag it with you there that just because things appear to be okay, they might not be okay behind the scenes. As a little look ahead to what's happened is the X has been interpreted as a string, a sequence of characters, not as a number. So 1, 3 on the screen looks like a number, but it's being interpreted by Python as a string, just like a string of characters. Okay, so there's an issue. We need to come back and sort that out, and we will do it. We'll do that next week. So I apologize for the small font. I'll keep that in mind in future. Now, something that you just saw for the very first time in this course is I introduced this quantity X. And I said that X was the thing that was going to store the value of what we typed in at the keyboard. That thing, that X, was known as a variable. And that's our very first variable that we've seen in this course. Variables are wonderful. They allow us to store quantities and process quantities in a human readable form. And they're a fundamental concept in all programming languages, including Python. So if we just go back to PyCharm for just a moment. If I don't know where I can see bear with me. I was looking for I was hoping to see in this larger font to see so bear with me. I want to see Python console. There we go. Okay, so what we can say, we can give the variable x a value. In this case, x is 13, and now we can introduce a new variable y, and we can make y equal to x plus 1. What's going to happen now if we print y? Aha, it worked. So that we've introduced two variables here. We've introduced the variable x. What happens if we print x? Tells us the value of 13. Value of y is 14. We can make a new variable, z is equal to x times 2. So what's going to happen when I press return here? Z is equal to x times 2. X has got the value 13. So z will be, what's going on? Okay, let's print z. And there it is, 26. Okay, so this instruction here, z is equal to x times 2. What it does, it's a single instruction, takes the value of x, doubles it, and stores the value in the variable z. Doesn't print it to the screen. In order to print to the screen, we've got to ask Python to print it to the screen. Let's do something a bit trickier. X equals x times 2. Now, in mathematics, that doesn't make any sense. X is equal to x times 2. Well, it only makes sense if x is equal to 0. But in a computer programming language like Python, x is equal to x times 2 means, the syntax means, or the semantics means, we take the value of x, we double it, and we write it back into the variable x. We've done the calculation. Let's now print x. 26. Aha. So that's told us something really important. It's told us that equals is not interpreted as equals. It means is given the value of. So we're just introducing the rudiments of programming languages here. You'll see this in the weeks to follow, but we've just seen a little bit live. We've talked about variables. We've seen it live. And here's this idea of what an equals is. So in computer languages, use the equals character for what's known as assignment. So at school, at maths, you would have learned equals means an algebraic equality. Something equals something. It's equal by definition. In Python, the same symbol, the equals, means something different. Remember I said computer programming languages are really fussy about the way that they interpret information. Here's a great example. If we see the statement a equals sine a plus 5, we read that, or Python reads that as a is given the value of a becomes the value of whatever a currently is plus 5. And we've seen a couple of examples at the bottom of the screen there. We've sort of seen those things live. We can add a and b together and store the result in C. That's what the equal sign means. It means C is given the value of. It becomes, it takes the value of whatever a plus b is. Just getting a taste of it, you'll get a chance to write some small examples which do these type of calculations in this week's lab, just to get your hands on the tools. Couple of examples. I think how we're going for time. We're going to read two integers from the keyboard, multiply them together and print the result to the Python console. Let's see if we can do that. Okay. What are we going to do here? If I was going to write this program, write this code, I wouldn't start by reading from the keyboard. I'd write by giving the values I type from the console. So for example, Let's call the two integers x and y, or a and b. Let's call them a and b. Let's give a the value 2, b the value 3, and multiply them together. Let's call the variable c, takes them a times b, and then prints the result to the Python console. Print c. Now, if I was in front of a class of 750 students, I would ask you, have we met the needs of the task that was set for us, which I'll just bring up briefly onto the screen here. Have we met the needs of example 1? Excuse me. Let me just see if I'm... Let's have a look. Okay, might just... So the short answer is no, I haven't met the needs of the programming specification because I haven't read the integers from the keyboard. Let's try reading them from the keyboard. Now, here we've typed a number. We're going to enter a number. We're going to enter 2. Okay, we've entered the first integer from the keyboard. B equals type a number. 3. C is equal to A times B. Notice, oh, what's going on? Problem. Trouble is these A's and B's are strings. We need to be able to convert them to integers. A type a number, 2. And I'm going to say, I'm going to make A is now the integer value of A. So that's taken the string A and converted it to an integer. How did I know that there was this function called int that converted a string to an integer? Because I've done a bit of Python programming, because I've thought about this scenario before. What I don't expect you to be able to do right now, Monday, 1.5 hours into your computer programming experience, I don't expect you to be able to know this magical instruction function int. I don't expect that. But you might need to ask a demonstrator. You might need to look up the textbook. You might need to give it a go and see what works and what doesn't. So what I'm doing here is I'm blending illustration of simple ideas with a little bit of what you're going to have to do, which is sometimes you'll need a concept that you might not quite have seen in lectures yet, but it's in the textbook. So in this case, it's converting a string into an integer. Okay, so we've entered one number from the keyboard. Let's type the second number from the keyboard. Sorry, why is this not? B equals enter a number, enter the number 3 for B. Convert that string into an integer. Let's check the values of A and B now. Aha, A is 2, B is equal to 3. Notice now that these are integers, if I just type their values, I get to see them at the console. C is equal to A times B. Now we print the value of C. And we've met the needs, we've met the specification. We've taken two numbers from the keyboard. We've had to convert them from strings to integers. We've multiplied those integers together and we've printed them to the Python console. That's not about output for the first lecture of an engineering computations course. But you know what? It's really, even with this short sequence of instructions, it's inconvenient to have to sit at the console and go up and down arrow, where am I, A equals, input a number into the number, convert it to integer, B is in the number, type a number, convert it to an integer, calculate C, print C. How many instructions have we got there in sequence? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We've got 6 instructions executed one after the other. It's inconvenient to have to enter them one after the other and in that way. So you know what we do? We bring all those statements together one after another, put them in a text file, and ask the Python IDE to interpret that text file. And if we were to put those 6 instructions in a text file and run that sequence of instructions, we've just written our first program. I'm not going to do that for you now, but you will do it in this week's lab, where you'll move from the console into entering those instructions into a program, a Python program, your very first Python program, running the program and having the program execute. So let's see what the second instruction is. The second example, and then we'll wrap it up. Our second program, our second activity is to read an integer from the Python console, calculate something called its factorial, print the result to the Python console. I'm just going to go to Discord for just a second, and I want someone to have a go at telling me what a factorial is. Ever heard of a factorial before? So Heath's got it written down too with an exclamation mark. Yep, good. Hugo says it's a math thing. You are correct. Aha, Sam was taken, says 5 factorial is equal to 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. And Steve Kennedy says 4 factorial is equal to 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. Aha, yeah, a factorial, and someone says factorial multiplies every number beneath. Yeah, including the number. So for example, 5 factorial is 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. So we could at the command line take the number x is equal to 5, for example, and we could compute x times x minus 1. We could calculate, which rather than type it in, we could type 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, and we get the number 120. That's good. What about 10? 10 factorial is 10 times 9 times 8 times 7 times 6 times 7 times 6 times 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. We don't really know the times 1, but we'll leave it in there. Okay. Wow, computed at 3,628,800. That's equal to 10 factorial. But you know, whenever you're doing something like what I just did then and typing a whole lot of stuff at the command line, there's almost always an easier way to do it with a computer programming language. So what about if we said as x is equal to 5 and we typed factorial x? No good. No good. The reason is that factorial, Python knows about factorials, but we haven't told our console about factorials. There's a difference there. So I've just used a statement. Again, do I expect you to have seen that statement before? Absolutely not. That's the first time I've typed it. It's your first lecture in ENGG1003. Will you use that statement, import math, whatever that means, through the course? Yes, you will. What we've actually done is told Python that we're going to be using a maths library. And there'll be more on libraries next week. We'll step you through it systematically. I just want to give you a flavor of it today. So now, using the library function inside the library is a function that's been written for us. We didn't see the code, but factorial, when x is equal to 5, factorial x is equal to 120. So we can actually put a print statement around that and print factorial, and we get 120. Now, x is equal to 10. Print math factorial x, and we get 3,628,800. How good is that? I'm going to show you something even better. X is equal to large number. If you multiply x, and we're going to compute factorial x. X times x minus 1 times x minus 2 times x minus 3, all the way down to 1. Factorial x is going to be huge. Let's see if it handles it. Maybe a bit too big. There we go. I went too big. Trying to recover it now. How do I recover it? If in doubt, start again. Give yourself a nice new console. I'll import the math library. How good's that? It's remembered that I've used it before. I'll write x is equal to 20. And then I'll print factorial 20. Big number. Let's make x 30. Print factorial x. Away we go. A couple of really powerful concepts we're illustrating here because we're close to the end of the lecture, into your first lecture. First concept is we've got variables. We can store quantities in symbolic expressions that we can then process. Really powerful. Idea number one. Idea number two is that sometimes we're going to use functionality that we bring in from outside. In this case, the use of the factorial function. We didn't have to write the factorial function. It was available to us through a library. Knowing how to use those libraries is important. And Python has an enormous number of libraries that are publicly and freely available. So quite often you'll solve a problem as an engineer by bringing in a functionality from outside and writing a program where you don't actually know what goes inside some of the functions. You just want to be able to take the data in, process it, generate an output. And we've seen that first here. So that's the second idea. First idea of variables. Second idea, library functions. And the third idea, which is actually really powerful, although when you see it on the screen, you might not be super impressed if you haven't written many computer programs before. But the fact that you can deal with very large numbers like that is not to be taken for granted. If we tried that in a C programming language, I suspect we would have had, for a start, it would have been much harder to get hold of the library function. And secondly, I don't think it would handle a number that big without computer programming complaining or crashing. So 3 really powerful ideas we've demonstrated there in that little live example. What I don't expect you to know is to have memorized some Python functions or know about them. Sometimes knowing about something is a matter of Googling. Does Python have a factorial function? Yes. What library does it come from? The math library. Import the math library and all is good. Wonderful. We're just about done. There's an extension activity there. Ask you to repeat the examples without using input or print. You can think about what would you do with the results. Maybe you could, I don't know, up to you. Extension examples, but there we go. So, into the first lecture. Into the first of Monday of week 1 of the semester. What do you need to do right now? You might choose to install the community edition of PyCharm. That's optional. Recommended if you've got a computer at home that you do it. That means you can work on your programming activities at home and get that practice up. Keeping in mind that the computer labs that the course is programmed into will have PyCharm installed already. There's some details on installation in the week 1 lab notes. Those lab notes are available from Blackboard. And as I mentioned, Brenton's put together a short video stepping through the installation process, and I put a link in these lecture notes. The textbook is available online, as I mentioned. There's a link there. It'll take you straight to the library. You can download the PDF. I'm recommending that you read the week 1 lab notes because some of you, even later today, will be working on your first lab. The lab notes, these lecture notes, and all the as we work through the semester, the associated assessment items, lab notes, lecture notes, they'll all be progressively revealed in Blackboard as we go. So the final bit of advice is to attend your on-campus and Zoom labs this week, and let's stay in touch via Discord. Until we catch up next, I'll say bye for now. Thank you.